Welcome back to the channel. I just want to talk quickly about the coronavirus exit strategy from this lockdown and isolation. There's a lot of chit-chat online, a lot of hoo-ha by the journalists, putting pressure on various governments and also trying to call out governments as if the governments are lying. The thing is, the journalists really wind me up these days, and I think I need to have this voice online and talk about the reality of things, because I'm not selling news and I don't have to have sensational bullshit on the channel. The first thing I want to talk about is the approach that the governments took and all around the world of doing this lockdown, and why that is completely pointless and useless. Because what they did was to protect the healthcare system. But as a result, or as a byproduct of that, they have all across the world damaged our economy. People had to shut down shops and businesses, and the whole world came to a standstill. And that is going to have a major impact for the next several years on our economies. That was an approach that the government had to take to protect the healthcare systems, but they didn't really have to. It was just because the masses were putting so much pressure on them to lock down and to take action. In reality, the science behind any kind of virus spread is it goes through the population like a tsunami. It doesn't care who's in the way. Everyone should get it and will get it at some point. It's a harsh thing to say, but the only thing that they have probably done is delayed the deaths of people who are going to die no matter what. So maybe they'll get another 3 months because they haven't been exposed, but once they're exposed, they will die. And maybe this lockdown and isolation for some of those people may prolong their lives for 6 months or even 12 months. But unless we have a vaccine, those who are going to die are going to die. And those who are going to survive will survive. The only thing is that as long as we can provide them with the necessary health care and support. So all the governments had to do was isolate the vulnerable and the old. They would have to increase the capacity of the hospitals to deal with a number of people, and that was it, and let this go through the population as it would. We have flu every year and people don't panic, even though roughly 200,000 people around the world die from just normal flu every year. But no one talks about it because it's not something people are scared of. Whereas this was a new thing and people are panicking. As an ordinary person with some scientific knowledge and medical background, I would say that at least 50% of most populations around the world have already got it. They may not have had symptoms at all, or they may have had some slight symptoms. So most of us have had it. Some of us would have had worse symptoms than others, and some of us may have thought that we have it, and the others will say, oh, I didn't get it. It's the same like flu every year. People say, oh, I'm very lucky I didn't get the flu. Well, you did get it, you just didn't have the symptoms. So going back to what the exit strategy should be, there is no exit strategy. People, especially the journalists, keep asking our politicians to say, tell us what you're going to do. Well, Mr. and Mrs. and Miss journalists, you're all just dumb idiots, because if you could do some basic research, you'd find out how viruses work. Even if we have a vaccine, it's not going to be 100% accurate or targeting the virus, because the virus will mutate. The best case scenario is we'll get 50-60% effectiveness, and that's it. So asking the government to give you an exit strategy is just absolutely stupid. There is no strategy. What they will do is they'll gradually release people into the masses. They will do some tests and they'll know who's got the virus and has got antibodies and can go back to work, that kind of thing. But there is no clear-cut strategy that they can impose or ask the people to follow, because there will be a second wave. It may not be very strong, but there will be one. And we live in a democracy. Most of Western Europe is a democracy. So people can't be forced for a very long time to stay in. They will just go out and say, you know what, F off, I don't care. Whereas in countries like China and Russia, with dictatorships, they can impose that, but obviously once they release people out into the wild again, this will come back. I mean, look at Taiwan, South Korea, Germany. Germany and South Korea were the two countries that had this amazing strategy to deal with the virus, and they did lots of tests and all that. They're going to come out of the lockdown and it will go through the population slowly once again. So there's a lot of talk about Sweden and the UK, and UK was doing what Sweden has done initially until the Imperial College posted that report, and then the government had to take action, because if they didn't, then the journalists and the media would have a field day with them saying, oh, there was a report published and they didn't follow, therefore X number of people died. If you look at the coronavirus death toll around the world and start comparing countries, it's not possible. The only thing we can do is 1 year from now look back at all the numbers around the world, and I'm fairly certain that most of these numbers will have the right or the same percentages around the world, minus the countries like China and Russia and other dictatorships where they will hide the figures and not give you the true figures. But if any government shows you, it will be the same. The only thing is that we can't compare Germany, Sweden, England, Italy, Spain, because every country is counting the deaths in a different way. Some of them are checking if the person who died had the virus. Some of them are saying if they had the symptoms and they died, therefore that is a corona death. So there's so much ambiguity in the collection of these numbers. In the UK, for example, they were only collecting the hospital numbers to begin with, and later on they started adding the numbers from the elderly homes and care homes and hospices and all that. So the numbers suddenly shot up, and obviously people think, oh, more people are dying or have died, but it's not the case. You have to look at the population density, you have to look at the age of the population, you have to look at their lifestyles, how they interact in the social world. Is it a very huggy, kissy kind of an environment like Italy, Spain, Southern Europe, where people are more tactile and close, whereas maybe in Northern Europe or other countries where people are a bit more distant, it might be different. But it's also about the population density, their lifestyle, their healthcare, so many elements that there's actually a very good video from TLDR News, which is online, that you can watch, that talks about why we can't compare different countries and why the stats look different, because it's not possible unless everyone was using the same formula to calculate coronavirus deaths. We can't compare. Same thing with modeling for infectious diseases. You can't say that our government or our scientists didn't do modeling very well, because you cannot predict what's going to happen with modeling because there's so many variables. I mean, who could have said that Italy or Spain would be the highest or the epicenter of coronavirus in Europe? It's just impossible to predict those kind of things because of the number of variables involved in this. The other thing that is possibly happening is that the immunity of the population, that while the virus is going through the population, is flattening the curve because people are developing immunity. That's the herd immunity term that people keep using, and that's causing the flattening of the curve. And also people are isolating. Once they go back into the masses, more people will start dying again. And I'm saying this not as a cold-hearted person, but that's the reality. It happens every year with the normal flu. People die, and because they're old and vulnerable or have underlying conditions, we just blame it on that condition and say they died because they had that condition. It's not really the case. They die because of a flu, but we just say cause of death is never written as flu, it's pneumonia or some other condition. So now what's going to happen is the government is going to get blamed for causing an economic crash all around the world, because even though the journalists were forcing them to take action, later on, a year or 2 years from now, when they look back at the figures and they'll think, oh, it wasn't as bad as everyone thought, so the government should have done something. Unfortunately, the hands of the government are tied, because they can't do anything, because the journalists and the populace, the masses, have a voice and they want to have a control and a say in everything. I'm going to read out this post from the internet that I saw, and I think it's so true. It talks about the kind of journalists. Every country has their own style, but this is specifically for the British journalists and how they react. So, if the government today announced that they have found a vaccine, how would various journalists react? Because if anyone who's watching the daily broadcast by the government and the journalists asking questions, they just ask the most stupid questions. So it says here, BBC, they will say, will you apologize for not creating it sooner? That's what BBC's Laura Kuenssberg, that really winds me up. She's just trying to further her own career and get herself noticed and remembered, and that's why she's asking all these stupid questions and saying, oh, do you apologize for this? Do you apologize for that? Well, why don't you journalists apologize for causing several economic crashes and all the issues that you've caused around the world? ITV will say, is it true that it contains animal products? Because ITV is just always about creating green shit and all that. Channel 4, wouldn't this have been quicker and more lives saved if the UK had joined the EU vaccination scheme? Sky News, you said creating a vaccine would take a year. Do you now accept that you are misleading the Parliament and the media and the general public, because now you've suddenly created it too quickly? Daily Mirror, isn't it true austerity stopped the vaccine being made sooner? Guardian, the left-wing newspaper, do you accept the evidence suggesting vaccines are racially biased? It's like, it is just unbelievable how these journalists come up with this shit. And our masses are so stupid that they just follow whatever the journalists say. So I guess people deserve the kind of leaders they get, and they deserve the kind of life they lead, because the outcome is a result of their own actions. Anyway, I thought I'd make a quick video about this whole lockdown exit strategy and the predictions for the next year or something. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe if you like it, and plenty more videos to come. Thanks for watching.